Hi, I'm Amir Denzel Hall, and I was class of 2017.
Could you describe what it was like to be in a Foss library during Amherst Uprising?
Yeah. In anticipation of this interview, I was thinking a lot about it, and I'll describe what. Yeah. So I got there at the meeting time that Lerato, Sanyu, and Katiana had indicated on the Facebook event page, and it was pretty somber. Like, there was this. It reminded me sort of a wake in a sense, in that not only was it somber, but there was this energy of caretaking. So you came in and you greeted the people you knew. A lot of those, of course, would be people you also cared about and loved. There was a sense of mourning, and it was clear that we were standing in solidarity with other universities as Katiana, Sanyu, and Lerato had set out to do, but it also felt as though already at the outset there was a sense of grief that felt local. It didn't feel like we were reaching for anything. It felt like already we were within ourselves and within our community. So yeah, I would say that that energy was mainly one of caretaking, um, grief, uh, was very somber, and that grew in intensity with time. um, Once people began speaking, I feel like grew or deepened would be the verbs I would use, because we just kept excavating what those feelings were. Like the air was already palpable, but once people began speaking, we got a sense of exactly what this feeling meant, this feeling of grief meant, for Black and POC communities, within the college. Uh, yeah, and the feeling changed with time. Uh, I wouldn't say that it was completely grief ridden over the 3 days that we were there, but like I remember the first night, for instance, the first night felt good. It felt like a sleepover, and that was, I think, one of my favorite moments of the Amherst Uprising was, being there and being with friends and in the manner of a sleepover, talking and reflecting, of course, on the kind of the very serious concerns that had been brought up during that day, and also balancing that with the levity of being with loved ones, right? One of my favorite moments of the uprising was the very first night. That energy of caretaking was still there, and it felt like a sleepover. And within the manner of a sleepover, people were just hanging out. Luckily, we didn't have, or we chose to ignore the homework that we had for that period of time. And a lot of professors were being very lenient during that period, in support of the uprising as well. And so there's this feeling of freedom that I feel like I rarely ever felt, during my years at Amherst, because um, for a moment in time we weren't beholden to these deadlines and all of these activities and all of these classes. We were there to support each other, primarily to stand in solidarity, not only with Mizzou and Yale and other universities, but with ourselves, and yeah, that was that moment of community where we saw something that was student led, and also like originated from students, and yeah, it was just fun. It was just fun. So yeah, I would say the energy also changed over time. Um, yeah, but that was one of my favorite moments.
How did you participate in Amherst Uprising, and what motivated you to do so?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my participation changed over time, just like the energy in the space, just like the space itself. Um, Initially, it was just to, I had seen in my own friend group, not necessarily a friend group, but among my own friends, I had seen the effect of what was happening on other campuses and heard from them already outside of the uprising how they resonated in their own experiences of Amherst. And I felt it was important to, for me, it was already local, you know what I mean? Like I was more going to support these friends while also, you know, standing in solidarity with other universities. And then as the picture became clearer, I think, especially for me as an international Caribbean student, sometimes I feel like my upbringing in a predominantly Black or POC place, it in a way didn't prepare me for like encountering racism or like naming racism or recognizing racism within a campus setting. So a lot of what students were talking about, POC students and Black students, in the ways that they had been discriminated against or in the ways that they had faced microaggressions on campus, I had not experienced, or I just had not recognized them for what they were at the time. And so I experienced the kinds of, oh, you're on financial aid, right? You know what I mean? And for me, those didn't have the kind of like, I didn't have the knowledge to know what was happening there, you know? And so I would say as people continued talking on that first day and sharing their experiences, they were giving me clarity into what Amherst was for a lot of people, and also giving me clarity into the ways that my experiences, the ways in which I had experienced racism myself and hadn't known. And so those kinds of that kind of clarity, that kind of growing clarity, I feel like deepened that motivation to really be in support of the students who I know had suffered a great deal, and also to stay there for my own understanding as well. I would say my motivation for the entire thing was really driven by a desire to support more than anything else. Um, so, you know, I would walk around, you know, um, see what people were up to, do little check-ins with folks. Uh, yeah, that's what it felt like for me.
In the days after Amherst Uprising, did you witness any changes on campus?
Yeah, I mean, I come back to caretaking a lot when I talk about Amherst Uprising and the energy outside of the library, like that caretaking energy that was inside of the library expanded. And so for the entire semester afterward, especially within the days after Amherst Uprising, the days and weeks, um, there was just this, like, I had never felt more human at Amherst College. There's this way in which the students and professors were really accounting for us as humans within our differences, right? And so I remember talking with professors, uh, one particular professor, um, you know, she stopped the class and she was like, let's talk about what's going on. Even I think even before the Amherst Uprising, she had invited the class to reflect about what was going on at Mizzou and Yale. And after that, this particular professor adjusted the syllabus and invited feedback on what the syllabus ought to be moving forward. And so that was from the faculty level. But then on the student and staff level, like people were asking, how are you, with a different, with a more, with more sincerity. People were asking, how are you, with more sincerity, in ways that actually invited you to speak from a place of truth rather than from a place of, actually, I have to get to this meeting, so I'll just get through this conversation, which is, I think, so common at Amherst, and was so common in my experience. People were holding hands a lot more, um, greeting with hugs a lot more. Val was such a beautiful place during that period because the staff members at Val, though they couldn't participate, a lot of them couldn't participate by being there at Frost Library. They would ask, how is it going? They would ask, and the ones, who I had rapport with, they would ask, how are you as well? And it was also the first time kind of like opening up those conversations between staff members um, and students about racism, about homophobia on campus, and just having that be an all-round culture, like having everybody be invested in those conversations, whether it be in a non-institutional way, in a casual way, in a, okay, we're meeting now, and like whatever comes up, I'm ready to handle, I'm ready to support you kind of way. That was the change that occurred. There was a way in which we were all accounting for our whole selves. And that, I think, makes that period of time after the uprising distinct from any other period of time during my college experience, to be honest. Yeah.
How do you understand the impact of Amherst Uprising on the campus, and how do you hope it will be remembered?
Yeah. I think the most visible changes that I could account for are seeing more diverse hires that the college did in the semesters and years after the uprising. So seeing more, diverse faculty and staff hires has been particularly encouraging. The implementation of the Chief Officer of Diversity and Inclusion, and that entire office, I think, has also done some really great work over the years. So those are, I think, two of the main kinds of like legacies that are particularly visible. In my own experience, I also think that a lot of professors who I had the pleasure of being taught by adjusted their pedagogy. So like I talked about, that one professor asking for feedback on what the syllabus, should be and how it should reflect our realities. I felt like that wasn't a unique experience, in that there were one or two other professors I could point to after that experience who, were just more aware of how our identities were shaping our experiences in relation not only to what was going on campus, but also what was going on abroad and stuff like that, and who would use class time to, like, not only class time, but use syllabus material to invite us to connect around that and to discuss that. And I was lucky in a way because I studied humanities. I was an English major, and I also did like theater and stuff like that. And so in a way, I was fortunate because these classes kind of lend themselves to, integrating personal experience into them. But yeah, that was one way in which I experienced a difference. And I was talking about this the other day. I think it's hard to map, right? Because changes like these often take years to implement or to see any real change. Like one faculty hire could take months, like a faculty search, and that's just one. So imagine trying to create, a really diverse staff and faculty. Yeah, that's probably going to take a few years. And so one of the things I hope in terms of how the uprising can be remembered, I would hope we approach memory um, in a methodical way. I would hope we could devise a methodology of um, of remembering that maps the changes, and also like connects them back to those initial demands that were made at the Amherst Uprising. Um, and I know a lot of work is being done around that, so I'm excited to see what that looks like. But yeah, I would just hope that that we don't lose track, that we don't lose that impulse to demand accountability from the institution, even though it's 5 years ago, that we don't continue asking, what have you done? What are you doing? And making note of those, giving praise where due, and also asking questions when necessary. Yeah, that's what I would hope.
Do you think that there's still work that needs to be done after Amherst Uprising, that there's still some work left unfinished from the demands and the goals that students outlined?
So it's hard to tell, right? Because a lot of the demands within Amherst Uprising were specifically things that related to student experience and to campus culture. So as an alum, even though I still have friends there, it's kind of hard to tell what the campus is like and how the culture has evolved or shifted. Two major things come up for me, as in places where I think there like work can still be done. I think the culture of work at the college is still exorbitant, at least from my interactions with folks who are still on campus and still participating in stuff there. And that I know is a hard culture to kind of like shift, especially because all elite institutions participate in that, and it's kind of their claim to fame in a way. And I know there are lots of like people doing individual work around that. So I know that that work will eventually like kind of blossom and spread and stuff like that. But I don't know that there was any like really active, methodical thing that was implemented to address how students were at that point feeling overworked. Because I remember feeling overworked until I was graduating. You know what I mean? So I wonder if there was, yeah, I wonder if there's anything that can be done around that. I think there were two other things that were coming up. No. Ooh, yeah, this isn't necessarily something that I don't think the Amherst Uprising folks spoke about this directly, but I think there ought to also be active kinds of, and if there are, like, please let me know, like, but I think there also ought to be active engagement of alumni particularly alumni whose experiences weren't all positive. There's so many people I know who still have beef with Amherst College and whose experiences were really, really, difficult for them. And in a way, after graduation, there's no point of connection, right? To kind of like either process that or like give the feedback that's necessary in order to make it easier for future students. And I feel like there ought to be a process like that because the kinds of feedback that people can share from their experiences, I feel like can be used by the institution to really make sure that certain that students don't have to go through certain difficulties. So I think specifically of, the experience of Black women in science and how that's like a repeatedly difficult ordeal for a lot of Black women students. I also think of the experience of middle class students with financial aid, right? Or like a lot of students whose situations were, difficult to track in some way, really got the short end of the stick when it came to financial aid, right? And there's a way in which a lot of students complained about financial aid not taking into account their human experiences and prioritizing, their documentation, which didn't always reflect the truth of their experiences. So I think there's a lot of wisdom that the alumni have from having gone through these experiences and having learned how to navigate them that I think the college can draw on more methodically in a way that can benefit future students. So I think those are the two things I feel like we ought to do more work around.
Do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share on Amherst Uprising?
Yeah, I feel this is something I think about a lot, but it feels like Amherst Uprising, especially, I think this was the second day when, and a little bit of the first night as well, when staff members had showed up and professors had showed up, and even they started sharing their experiences of racism and microaggression and homophobia on campus, and they were offering support and they were offering, like not only their stories but like themselves as resources within that moment beyond their roles within staff or faculty. And I think of that moment because I feel like that, I think, reflected the real spirit of Amherst. I feel like it was the most Amherst thing, really, to experience the entire campus coming together. And not the entire campus, of course, because, there are always people who oppose these things. But to see that there were so many people throughout the classifications of staff, students, and faculty who were experiencing the same things and who were extending themselves as support for each other and particularly for the students in their experiences. I don't feel like I experienced more community than I did at Amherst Uprising. And so there's a way in which I feel like the period itself has a lot of wisdom for what Amherst is and what it can be. yeah, and I just hope that this work you're doing can draw on that too, right? Because I feel like Amherst Uprising really is what the college can be at its best. Not only in its demands, but literally in how we organize ourselves on that day. I remember even alumni who weren't in Amherst were calling in and checking in on the students that they knew. Some alumni were ordering food and pizza, for the group who was at the library. Like that kind of support, that kind of like multi-layered kind of, there's nothing like it. That I don't think I experienced that ever again at the college. So I would hope that, yeah, we could examine the ways in which Amherst Uprising functioned, and draw from that, the best of those things to make Amherst a better place. So yeah, thank you for this work, because I think it's doing just that.